everybody, Laura Grisamore here at Studio 176. This is part 2 of our summer series 2021 featured artists here in the studio downtown Park Rapids. Today I have with me co-owner Jeremy Simonson, and I'm going to hand it over to him to tell us a little bit about himself and his current work. So let's dig in. Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about your current work that you have up here and your journey with that work?
Yeah. Well, let's go back to when I moved here. When I moved to the region, there was Line 3 was being sort of argued in the newspapers. There was people for it and against it. I mean, it's a beautiful region, and I love this area. I grew up on the lake in Strawberry Lake near the White Earth Reservation. And I really had an appreciation for water. I always lived around water and always felt happy around water. So I wanted to do a series. Well, it first started with me photographing these pipes. I'd drive to Bemidji and I'd see these fields of pipes, and they were all kind of starting to rust out. So I got a whole photo series of that, and I kind of felt like I was sort of, being a rebel, breaking through the fence and trying to, photograph this sort of project that's been delayed through legislation and sort of people trying to protect our earth, and our water source. And then they painted them all aqua, and all of a sudden they got an idea that, here all of a sudden they painted it this watercolor. So I went back and I started photographing that, and I didn't know where the series was going to go. And then in 2015, I just was at the lake cabin. Of course, I spent my summers there, and I started photographing. I always had a fascination with water. Reflections, light, how it interacts with the landscape, how it interacts with the clouds. And I started thinking that, what other thing do I appreciate the most is my family. And why did I move to this region is because of my family. And so I started doing this portrait series of just family submerged in water. Their eyes, I wanted just their eyes at a gaze, kind of staring at the camera, adding importance to not only the subject, which is my family, but the importance of this water that was sort of being debated in the area at the time. And so I just kept working on that series in the summer. It was more of a personal project than anything. I didn't know how it was going to kind of evolve or end up as a show. I didn't know if it was too obvious to parallel these images of my family against these images of these aqua pipes. And that's what I thought initially that the show would be this sort of pipeline and an image of a portrait of a family, the importance of both, and then the destruction next to it. And these pipes looking like water, but yet they're going to probably be something that destroy our water. And from there, I just kept working with it. And in 2015, this year, 2020, when the pandemic hit, and we all lived in our own bubble. I mean, we all had our own experiences with it. We all felt isolation. We all, it was a strange year. And with the spring, we had the George Floyd, I can't breathe, happening. And it was just a heavy year. And I got to the lake and I thought, I need to do a project, maybe pick this project up again. And Pipeline was also going to start digging. And so it kind of became important again. So this project kind of has a lot of layers to it. What it brings to the viewer, I don't know. I leave it up to their imagination to have their own experiences. But my intention for it was to push us underwater because we all were isolated. We were all in our bubble. We were all experiencing our own sort of turbulence and movement and motion and trying to tread through this sort of awkward year. And so at the end of June, I ended up putting my nephew under the water, which is actually this piece here, which started this whole sort of underwater series. And then I had an aha moment and said, you know what, this is it. This is how I'm going to express it. It's going to be underwater. It's going to experience the 2020 summer, that year that we had, and go from there. And this is what I got.
Really quickly, I don't know if I touched on Underwater 2020. You had talked about how this series is kind of more through different ideas.
Yeah.
What is the title of this particular one? Would you say kind of like excerpt of photos that came out of?
So if I were to look at it historically, this is 2020, and it was born in the summer of 2020. And I don't know if summer needed to be in there because it's kind of obvious that it's in summer here for, but underwater ended up becoming the word because of what we were all experiencing, in COVID. And my bubble was my family during that time, so I allowed myself to go to the cabin. with social distancing, and it was nice to be in the outdoors and not have to wear a mask, and interact with family at a distance, but we all had distances. We were all underwater, and so that's where I think this whole series encapsulates a year in time, for the most part. We were all underwater at the summer of 2020, or at least I was. I don't know. How about you?
I think we were all feeling that. Yeah. Definitely underwater and just.
But it was a beautiful time, as well as a turbulent time. I mean, and that's why I didn't want the images to be ugly. I wanted it to also be somewhat beautiful and have that movement and that turbulence, and the bubbles was kind of things I was trying to go for, with all of us living in our own bubbles. And so I was thinking about these symbols that, I identified with. And then, like I said, end of June, I just decided this is what I'm going to do. And so when I visited the lake and I had willing participants, I submerged them underwater. And this is what it was a result.
You were taking these pictures. What were kind of the reactions from your family, or some kids here too?
I'm always there. It's funny. I'll come to the lake cabin. I usually do day trips because I only live 30 minutes away. So I never stay the night at the cabin. I always, will get up in the morning, go to the cabin. And I think everyone in my family knows I pull up my camera when I get a little bored. And I work hard. And so when I do have time off, I want to be with family and I want to experience them. But I also want to take some photos, which becomes limited in my busy summer. So I always have my camera with me, and they know that I always have my camera with me. And so, they learn to become willing models. They don't always want me to be, taking photos. With this series, when I started doing it, I got maybe 5 minutes out of them, a couple dunks, and then they were like, I'm done, there's water in my nose, there's, things in my ear, and I was just like, okay. So it became a challenge to kind of force them underwater, but they always know. It's funny now when I come there and they know that I was doing these portraits with, with just their eyes. I go, can I take a picture of you? And they always just dunk. I have them trained. But now I'm like, no, I'm moving on from something else. So I got a lot of those, stay up out of the water. As you learn from the series, I like the expression of their face. And so I wanted them out of the water in 2020. And so I started bringing them up, out of the water. And but they've always been willing participants, me and my camera. I'm the eccentric uncle. It's okay.
Why art? When do you think you realized that you were first an artist, or how has art and creativity been a part of your life?
Oh, well, great student. I always lived in my imagination. When I was young, I don't know, I grew up in a big family of 8, and I remember the first time I learned how to draw was my oldest sister, Cindy. And she taught me how to draw a horse, and she did it in a figurative style, sort of like you draw a circle and a circle and a circle, and you create sort of the style of the mane, or of the aperture of the horse, and then you create through the circles the mane. She must have learned it in her art class, but I was fascinated, and it started me drawing. It just started me like kind of doodling and drawing, and then another inspiration was my mother. She'd always be doodling. She worked for like food service at NDSU College, and she'd be on the phone all the time. Back in the day when you just have a landline, which I know, I'm old, I'm aging myself, but a landline, and she would sit and doodle, and she would just draw while she was talking to all these people to hire, because it was a very part-time gig, and so she had this group of ladies that would work for her, and it was like a family. I loved it growing up. That's how I, earned my allowance. I never got an allowance. I had to sort of work for it. But she would doodle all the time, and so I think just, love of mother and love of, of seeing her doing something that just was sort of subconscious and happened is where I ended up going in my imagination. So from there, I just kept doing art classes. So my mom submitted us into Troward Performing Arts. They had a youth arts program where I learned how to do filmmaking. We learned how to do little closed captions. We were, me and my brother were in this little Star Wars remake. And so that's where film kind of came into play. From there, I started performing in 7th grade and did my first audition for plays because I lived in my imagination and always was play acting in my own, I'd be at the lake and I'd go off in the woods and just pretend I was someone, and so then theater came into play. I ended up getting a theater degree, master's of fine arts in acting. Was in Chicago for years acting, and but beyond that, I started photography back in high school. First started at Creative Art Studio when I was just young, probably grade school, where we had we learned how to do sort of a little camera out of a Quaker Oats box, and it was like a pinhole camera. And so you'd put a film in there, and when you expose it to some sort of subject, and you got these sort of strange sort of impressions on the film after you developed it, or the paper, and it just fascinated me that you could capture something, and you didn't have control over it because this pen sort of like caused an artistic expression that you really didn't have control over. So it fascinated me that this thing that I didn't have control over, I wanted to control. And so then I took photography and video arts in high school, and thought, when I graduated high school, that I was going to be a photographer, but the theater kind of took over, and I ended up doing that. I mean, both of them were amazing experiences. And so I became an actor out of grad school, and from there, I ended up, a friend handed me an old Vivitar, just a point and shoot 35 millimeter, and it just ignited my sort of interest in photography again. Again, with a point and shoot, you don't have much control. The only thing you have control about is the film that you put inside and the subject matter that you're photographing. And so I pretty much for 4 or 5 years documented my life. It's sort of an urban sort of situation where it was my life, and what was experiencing. I would just pull up this camera, I had a little bag on my side, and I'd pull up this camera anytime I felt like I needed to start photographing. I would do rolls and rolls and rolls of film. So I decided at that point that I was going to become a photographer, at least a hobbyist. And the rest is history. I ended up in Minneapolis, bought my first digital camera, and then the rest is history. Just kind of learned myself on the digital camera, and this is where I ended up.
Just like in post-processing, looking through things and playing, is that part of your process, or do you get inspiration from
That's a huge
or?
part of my process. When I have time for it, you take all these photos, and sometimes you just revisit them really quick and say, okay, did I capture anything? Did any of these work? They always say out of photography, you may take 100 photos, but maybe one ends up being, actually they say almost 1,000, and then one is one that is like portfolio worthy. But you took a lot of these other images, so I like to play with them. I like to take them and see, what was I thinking? Because when I go out photographing, I look at it, it almost becomes a meditation for me, where I zone into the nature and I try to become one with it. Try to get rid of whatever happened during the day, whatever happened at the job, whatever happened, whatever was going on. I try to concentrate, be in the moment. The nice thing about knowing your equipment so well and understanding it is it becomes second nature. You don't have to think about how to capture the image anymore. You just basically know what you're capturing. So once you see something that entices you or that you're sort of zenning out with, to refer back to Laura's series, you have the talent and capability, second nature, to capture that image the way you want it. But yes, I think in post-processing, that is definitely one of my signature sort of, I will take all these images, these thousands of images that you think are maybe trash, and start playing with them in post-processing, and all of a sudden something that you thought wasn't going to happen, that you're like, why did I take this? And once you get back to it and you realize, wait, there's something here. I think, get back into that thought process I was in, and then maybe even take it further, and that's what I love doing too, is just taking something that was an idea and then making it happen into something that ends up being a beautiful piece that's either meditative, sometimes it's not always telling a story, sometimes it is just an experience of line and form and color.
I think it'd be so cool just to even see your own self underwater. Now
Right.
I kind of want, like, next time you're out at a lake to pop over and just
Right.
get my,
That's the hard thing. I tried to do it. I did try to do it myself. I go, okay, I need to be part of the series. Without handing someone else the camera, I found it very difficult.
I didn't even think about that. To be like a self.
Because I'm moving in and out and trying to capture and reframe and get the actual frame I want. All of these were untouched. This is the shot that I took, as far as framing goes. It was like, that was the frame I took. I didn't want to, with this series, when I started doing this series, I was playing with all these bubbles and all this movement, and I thought that was the subject. It wasn't the people, it was going to be this movement in this sort of abstract sort of form. But then I pulled back and said, no, the photo's good as is. I was taking this sort of portraiture and doing it in another way, putting them underwater. But so I allowed the form of the person to show, and decided that the shot was good as is.
Mm-hmm. So how do you know, and you talked about this a little bit, like when your work is done.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about play, but then also with these, you had mentioned to that after playing with them and just with framing them.
Yeah.
You know, like you just kind of knew. So how, just in general, do you know when your work is done?
You know, it's instinctual. I think, you know, you have intention when you go into a project. And when you're in the darkroom working with an image, you know, sometimes it's like it comes out of the can. Most of the time, a lot of the time, if I know it's done, it's come out of the can, which I mean the camera, ready to go. All I really have to do is maybe add a little saturation, a little bit of color, a little bit of, you know, if I was being a purist in photography. But when I get a little bit more creative, when I know it's done, I think is just when instinctual. It's an instinctual feeling. You might be playing and playing and playing, and I will play with some images forever, and it never is done. Never, ever, ever. You know, you're always going, okay, will that ever be done? I think it's a reshoot, and so I'll go back and I'll reshoot, and then I'll finally go, okay, now it's done, because I got it, and now I got what I wanted. Because it doesn't always work, and that's the nice thing about art is it's really about the journey, and it's not about the end. In the end, it is. You know, you do have a product in the end. But really, what I love is the process. And what I loved about acting when I was an actor was the process. I loved getting the script, getting the job, of course, then getting the script, reading the script, and your imagination to float. And I think that's what happens with art and with what you're doing. Like I said, you know, in photography, it's a meditative experience. But when you take it home and you look at it, you're like, okay, that one works, that one works, that one works. And you know what works. Those might need some help later on when I can revisit them. But when you do play with them, and you just let your imagination flow, and you think with that piece, and you let it sort of sink into your subconscious and spark your ideas, you play with it, and then when it's done, it's done. You go, okay, that's it. Don't touch it anymore, because if you touch it anymore, it's gonna be a mess. It's gonna be a mess. So yeah, that's it. Play.
Yeah, that's such a huge message, though. Like,
Yeah.
just to play and stay curious.
Stay curious, yeah.
So what do you think, what's next for you? Anything that you're currently working on, or projects, ideas you have in your mind, or?
You know, what is next for me? You know, with this pandemic, you know, I had this idea of quitting my job and sort of becoming a nomad. I don't know if you saw the, you know, beautiful little documentary, or not documentary, little docu sort of movie on these sort of people who live in their sort of trailers. They drive around the country throughout the year, following the seasons and following the jobs. And with the COVID, I thought, you know, what makes you happy? It made you really analyze yourself and figure what is it that makes me sing? What is life? What is worth living for? And I really like creating. I really love the time to create. And I really appreciated, you know, with COVID, I had to work from home. And so you were stuck. I personally, I'm single, so I lived alone, a little isolated, really in my head. And it made you analyze what you really found valuable in life and what you really appreciate. And I appreciate creating things. I really appreciate capturing a moment. I appreciate taking a portraiture of someone and capturing their spirit. I appreciate capturing a landscape. So a couple projects that are, I guess, always been in the back of my head is one, to document my family. This kind of is a document of my family in a way, but in an artistic way. But I wanted to challenge myself, which is sort of going out of the norm, and actually do a portrait series of my family. Either it's on a black background and it's just them looking at the camera, but I want to capture their spirit and who they are as a person. And if nothing else, it becomes sort of a capsulation of time, like this is. This is a capsulation of 2020. I'd love to capsulate a time period of a family tree. Come from a large family. I don't think they would appreciate it in the sense, but I think down the line it would be appreciated, just as sort of a history piece. And I don't know, you know, that would be a personal project. But like I said, a nomad is sort of on my radar, to live 6 months here, possibly around family, and photographing this region and continuing what I like to do here, and then maybe going south and photographing other regions, you know, up in the mountains, up in the desert, and really get out and travel more and experience this world and document it. Where that, I don't have a really solid project besides the portrait series that I'm working on, but just to be open to the next project and see where it takes me.
You know, if you had a superpower,
Oh, yeah.
what would that be? Or what is your superpower?
Right. I don't know. No, I do kind of know. You know, when I was, I talked about earlier how I sort of lived in my imagination. One of those things was I watched the Saturday morning cartoons and always, it was, oh, Mighty Isis, and, at night there was Wonder Woman. I know I'm aging myself again. Superman and the superheroes, and I, of course, Dungeons and Dragons in that fantasy world, it allowed me. But one of my favorites that I kept sticking on when I was young and I'd, be off in the woods doing my own thing is I'd pretend that I could control the weather. So it was like Almighty Isis, where she could control things, the wind and the storms and the rain. And being a photographer, I think it fits completely because, we are at whims of Mother Nature, of the light and of what's happening around us. And so if I could control that, man, what the photos I could create. So yes, I would control the weather. My superpower would be weather, control the weather.
That's such a brilliant superpower, especially for a photographer. What did I think about? Of course. Oh, I'm gonna quick jump right back here. I'm with you. I just wanted to thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. Even though I know you and we're friends and we do a business together, it's always awesome to talk to you about your processes and your thoughts and ideas, and I learned a bunch of stuff about you today
I think likewise, I've learned a lot from you. I've loved working in this. What is great about our studio and having us four artists in here is the ideas we can bounce off each other.
Yeah. We have so many.
We have so many.
Sometimes too many.
Right. But it keeps the creative juices alive, and I think this, I looked at this space as sort of a studio where we could hang the work that we've been creating, offer it to the public to purchase if they want, to do this, to feature ourselves, and just to sort of also bring other artists in and learn from their creative experiences. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and I don't know if any of you guys know, but Jeremy Simonson was the mastermind behind Studio 176. He had an eye on the space and invited myself and two other artists in as well to join in on this venture and journey and adventure
right.
with it. So just thank you so much, and you're a continual driving force behind this. So
you're welcome.
Thank you, and thanks so much for taking time again today to share everything with us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good day.